Introducing the all-new 251 electric range at Hugo Luna Motors. See our Peugeot E2008, now available in electric. This bold SUV boasts a striking design with sleek LED headlamps and a redesigned grille for a powerful presence. With zero CO2 emissions and 156 HP of power, the E2008 delivers efficiency and performance. Discover more at hugolunamotors.ie. Drive the future today.
Saturday View with Ronan Berry. With thanks to Lumcloon Energy, pioneering innovation, powering progress. LumcloonEnergy.com. Call 0818 300 103. Text or WhatsApp your Saturday View to 083 3010 103.
Hello and a very good morning to you all. It's Saturday, the 1st of March. I'm Ronan Berry and it's time for Saturday View here on Midlands 103. Coming up over the next hour, we're going to look at that whole topic of isolation and loneliness and people being cut off in our communities, whether that is by choice, whether it's something they've chosen to do, whether it's something that's almost a hangover or a follow-on from COVID-19 lockdowns. Because bear in mind, we're approaching the 5th anniversary, hard to believe in some ways, of the first lockdown being issued in March of 2020. What impact has that had on our communities? There's been many, some positive, some negative, some very, very distressing, and some really fantastic stories within that. So this morning we're going to hear of a community taking action over in Laois and getting people out, getting together, getting them something to do during those lockdowns in COVID. And it has gone from strength to strength. And that activity has now found a new home in the Rock GAA Club. So we'll be joined in a little while by the chair of the Rock GAA to talk about that. And it really is a great story of showcasing a community in action, and something that started during lockdowns but has now become a huge social part. Because Seamus Boland from Irish Rural Link was recently quoted as saying that the importance of direct human contact should not be underestimated. And is that something that you feel is something that happens less, particularly since COVID, since those lockdowns, since we went through years of our lives where we were nearly afraid to walk on the same side of the street as somebody? If you were out in your front garden or out on your road and you saw your neighbours coming, you separated and you made sure not only was there 2 metres between you, but maybe 5 or 10. That fear of people. Is there still a fear of contact with people, of actually being in groups now, yet again? Has that prevented people from getting out into their communities, into society? If you're somebody who's been affected by that, you can let us know, 083 3010 103, text or WhatsApp number, or you can give us a call here on 0818 300 103 and say, and if you are somebody who then established a community group or a little club yourself, or even just a group of friends to try to circumvent that, let us know too. 083 3010 103 is the text and WhatsApp number. All that is coming up a little bit later on the show. But to begin, I'm going to go, I suppose, look towards Dublin and come back to Laois, then go across to Mullingar, because the very famous or infamous nightclub up in Dublin, Copper Faced Jacks, has a very distinct Mullingar connection. It also has a connection to Laois because the owners, Cathal Jackson and his wife, Cathal actually was born in Roscommon but grew up in Laois, and you'd know a lot about Coppers. They don't do a lot of media stuff, but back in around 2021, be it when the nightclub was actually closed due to COVID, it was reported in the Irish Mirror that the couple behind the iconic Coppers nightclub paid themselves almost 22 million the previous year. So it just gives you a sense of the scale of what we're dealing with when it comes to nightclubs like Copper Face Jacks. Maybe you've been in it. I don't think I was ever in it. I'm probably one of the few people that hasn't been. Aidan Barry said beforehand he wasn't in it either. So plenty of stories obviously coming from Copper Face Jacks, and it has been obviously it's a huge success both commercially and maybe you could even say culturally up in Dublin. But to find out more about that Mullingar connection, and there's a really interesting story coming around corruption, heavy drinking, scandals, electioneering, all of the above. Who better to talk to than local historian Jason McKevitt, a man who loves and always delivers a good story. Jason, what have you got for us this morning?
Good morning. How are you, Ronan? Are you keeping good?
Fantastic. You weren't in Coppers last night, so were you?
Oh, no, I wasn't in Coppers last night. My daughter probably was. But no, I was out with Mullingar Harriers this morning on the 12k run. So I just want to say hello to all the Mullingar Harriers this morning who may be listening. And especially Joan, who was running beside me at one stage, Joan Hickston. So good morning, everyone. But no coppers for me last night.
But anyway, Copperface Jack, say it's infamous. Yes. Most people know of it, but there's a Mullingar connection to it, which is, quite an interesting story. Where do you want to begin on it?
Well, where do we begin? Who was Copperface Jack? I mean, everybody just says, "What? That's a nice name for a nightclub." But actually, there was a real life person nicknamed Copperface Jack, and of course, like that, Jack is sort of another version of the name John, and the man was John Scott, was his name. Now, John Scott was, your part of the Protestant ascendancy, and he was born in Clonmel in County Tipperary, so he was a Tipperary man. But he wouldn't have been born with a hurley stick now. He would have been more born with a cricket bat. That would be of his background. But he went to college in Kilkenny, whatever, and a friend of his was being bullied, and he defended him, Hugh Carleton, at Kilkenny College. And because of that, Hugh's father looked after John, and he was a big merchant from Cork. And of course, he paid him to go to Trinity, and then the rest is that. So he started socially climbing the ladder slowly up, and he trained as a barrister. I went to the bar. And of course, like everything, it was all through corruption. So he was there, he was making links, and, the transparency wouldn't have been the big thing it would have been now, and, who you knew at the time and all that sort of stuff. And by 1769, he was made an MP for Mullingar, our town. And we had two MPs at the time, and one of them was actually a Church of Ireland rector during that time, and the second seat went to John Scott.
So his connection with Mullingar, it sounds from the reports I've read, or it reads, he didn't exactly come to Mullingar and Westmeath to canvass people either.
No, not really. But when we think of John Scott as an MP for Mullingar, we're definitely not thinking the box of Mourne standing on the banks of the Shannon with sandbags over his shoulder. No, he wasn't that type of public representative. Absolutely not.
And I suppose it speaks to a vastly different electoral system. I mean, we sometimes look across at the States for their presidential elections, and it's such a different system than we use here in Ireland, and even the system in the UK is different. Back then, a whole other world altogether. Like if you were a landlord and owned properties, you were almost a shoe-in then for the senior political positions.
And that's exactly what it was, and they looked after each other. So with John Scott, I mean, of course, in the Mullingar area, I mean, you would have had, this would have been of the Wicked Earl, the first Earl, Robert Rochford. He would have been still alive up until 1774. You would have had the Edgeworth family, who would have owned Mullingar. They would have been the landlords of Mullingar, or from Newtown Forbes, should I say. So the family there, they would have been the Earls of Granards. They would have actually owned Mullingar at the time. So all these contemporaries, you would have had then the Earls of Longford. So all these, this would have been John Scott sort of type of people, if you know what I mean. So of course, he would have been made an MP, but again, it wouldn't have been canvassing on doors and knocking on doors, that type of thing. It would have been true, all these landlords and landed gentry around the area would have voted from initially, looked at them. One landlord could maybe have 30, 40, 50 votes or something like that. So these were rotten boroughs. And this was the old Irish Parliament, by the way. This wasn't the Westminster in London. This was before the Act of Union. So we did have an Irish Parliament, and that was on Stevens's Green, of course. So this was the Parliament we were elected to. So when we think of the Act of Union of 1800 to 1801, when all MPs had to take their seats over in Westminster, everyone thinks of this old Irish Parliament as being a great parliament. It wasn't. It was rotten. It was corrupt, pure and utter corruption by the ascendancy people who lived in Ireland at the time.
You described him in an article in the Westmeath Topic recently he said he had a hard neck and as well as being a social climber. I suppose one certainly helped the other, I'd imagine.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, he was a social climber. We can see it from his days in Kilkenny, and then on to Trinity, where he just linked with the right people and networked with the right people and all that sort of thing. And we see by the mid-1770s, then while being an MP, he was also made Attorney General for Ireland, the Irish Parliament. And then he became a Lord Chief Justice. And, how we got the name Copperface Jack was actually from this lifestyle he lived. I mean, these would have been in gentleman bars all over Dublin, and even then the odd time in Dublin. They would have been drinking heavy. They would have been gambling. They would have been smoking. They would have been doing everything. You name it, these guys were doing it.
Yes. You'd often look at a nickname and you'd wonder what was the reason behind it. Was there some kind of gallant story or of bravery or of hospitality or charity? But no, it was good old-fashioned hard drinking.
It was hard drinking, and this was it. And his complexion then went a sort of a coppery bluish colour. So this was it's sort of almost like cyanosis, especially with drink on him. And so this is where he got the term copper-faced Jack, because he had this brownish, coppery face. And some people may suggest almost like cirrhosis, almost colouring of the face, you know. But he was also had another nickname, Ronan, and he was known as the Hanging Judge.
Okay. I've heard of him before now. I didn't realise it was the same person.
Yes, and there's a whole load of legends come around, you know, some fact, some fiction, and some fanciful. And I suppose one of the things was he loved to execute people. So you went in front of him, especially if you were a young Irish peasant Catholic, and you went in with an issue, you were going to be executed and hung when he was judge. And apparently, what he liked to do, again, this is allegedly, is that he sometimes liked to take it into his own hands, literally, and he would throw someone over his shoulder and hang them.
Wow.
And that was it. Allegedly.
Wow.
Okay. Yes. So there you go. So this copper-faced Jack John Scott, I mean, I think as I'd always say, you know, we look at our history, he wouldn't have been a man that I would have liked to have went for a coffee, which I can assure you.
Certainly not.
Or a beer.
It sounds like, he wouldn't be too interested in the coffee as well. But I see Miles Dungan, actually, the famous kind of sports reporter, had a blog, and this is probably from about 10 years ago. And he writes about copper-faced Jack, and when he became a barrister, interestingly, he said in the late 18th century, Ireland had over 700 barristers, when England and Wales had only 600 combined. And he said like that, you know, even back then, the Irish were kind of focused on kind of litigation, and you know, it's quite interesting how that almost continues. But yet at that time there was so much corruption. I suppose the question is, and we see a lot of stuff happening over the years with maybe, you know, libraries and universities, particularly in America, England, be named after maybe former slave traders. If somebody was opening a pub nowadays, would they actually call it after him? I wonder now, given his past, and especially his reputation as the hanging judge.
Well, that's the question. I mean, I suppose, if we look through the modern lens of 2025, we would kind of say, wow, is that the right person to call something after? But at the same token, you know, we can't, you know, we have to look another way. He did live in Harcourt Street, where that actual nightclub is now. It wasn't the same building, of course. He lived in 17 in Clonmel House for a while. So that's where he lived, which would have been down the road from where the current Copperface Jack's pub is.
Absolutely.
But
We'll have to organise a road trip some night, maybe. Interestingly, is there any trace of him in Mullingar in any way? I know, like, you know, he was kind of, him being an MP was somewhat tentative, but any actual trace of him in the town?
No trace at all of him in the town. I mean, he would have, of course, he would have come very briefly to town, to Mullingar there. He would have linked with the Rothschild family, with Belvedere and all that, but then so too did Jonathan Swift. I mean, all these guys would have paid a visit to Belvedere, you know, a very historic place, of course. So he would have been here very briefly, you know, and then out again. But very little primary source stuff on his visit to Mullingar. But he definitely was here. He was very aware of the town. And again, Mullingar at that time, you had a lot of gentry, as I said before. You know, you had the Earls of Granard who owned the town. You had the Lord Longford's family out in Tullinally. You know, you would have had all this sort of his kingsmen, if you like, around the area. So, yeah, but very little reporting of, you know, what he was doing. As I said, he was an MP for Mullingar. He was a member of Parliament, but he was no boxer more, and he wasn't standing there with a sandbag in the banks of the Brusna, I can assure you.
Well, you've summed it up brilliantly as well. Jason, a pleasure as always. Thank you so much for bringing this the story of Copperface Jack to us this morning, and the local Midlands connection to it as well. Take care, Jason. We'll talk to you again soon.
Take care. We chat soon, Ronan. Thank you. Bye-bye.
He's some man to find these great stories, and just to give that little bit of background and context to them as well. Yeah, really, really different times, wasn't it, back then? And so Copperface Jack, previously the MP for Mullingar, and Copperface Jack's, of course, now at the heart of Dublin's nightlife, and doing quite well, and has made a guy with strong Laois connections very wealthy indeed. Time now to head for a quick break. Before that, though, one of two of you got in touch regarding what I spoke about with COVID and the sort of after effects of those lockdowns, and we're going to look at it today, particularly from the point of view of isolation and people still feeling lonely and maybe disconnected from their communities or from the life maybe they had before those lockdowns came in. And Theresa and Clara texted in and just said one thing she'll never forget about it is that it was a very, very bad time for everyone all around, but our government went ahead with the big Golfgate dinner in Galway and no convictions for it. And yeah, we can remember that when that happened at the time, and there were some political casualties. People lost jobs, many of whom actually are back in the new government this time. So thanks for your text, Teresa. Keep them coming in there. 083 3010 103, text and WhatsApp number 0818 300 103 by phone.
Saturday View, with thanks to Lumcloon Energy, pioneering innovation, powering progress. LumcloonEnergy.com.
I'm joined in the studio now by Seamus Boland, the CEO of Irish Rural Link, and Seamus is also a member of the Just Transition Commission here on the Midlands too, and has strong links with EU, particularly as in his role with the European Economic and Social Committee as well. So a man who is busy, but a man who is very much in touch with the needs and the wants, I suppose, and the challenges that are presented across rural Ireland. And he was quoted in media recently as just highlighting the importance of direct human contact. And I guess as we approach the 5th anniversary of the first COVID lockdown, Seamus, have we lost a lot of people? Have they lost direct human contact with maybe people they were once in contact with before COVID? Or is it something that has been growing for a number of years?
Yeah, I think the conclusions of different reports and indeed the experience of Irish Rural Link would back up that. Remember, during COVID, Irish Rural Link had an extensive network of volunteers around the country. And I think awfully it was led by our own Michael Dignan. So what I'm saying, I'm really basing it on the results of that experience and also the results of several reports. For example, there's one in England and Britain and indeed across Europe as well. All of these reports are saying one thing: COVID changed a lot of things in rural and isolated areas. And remember, you can be lonely in the estates as well. It's not just a rural thing. It really and truly exacerbated the whole loneliness and isolation problem. And I suppose the biggest problems that emerged from it was, and it's still very bitter among people, is the fact that in many cases they were not able to say goodbye to their loved ones. And that was a major, it comes across all the reports that I've read and even our own experience.
Yeah, and actually on both this station and even across the country, I've heard, a lot of people recently again just opening up those what are really deep wounds now, where the circumstances meant they couldn't be with somebody as they passed away. Even the funerals where 10 people were allowed, and they didn't get to see the body because it was put in a body bag. And I suppose you've got to go back to that time. There was a huge fear. People didn't know exactly what we're dealing with, but 5 years on, people are clearly struggling a lot with that.
Yeah, I think first of all and foremost, it's not a blame game either. We had a very dangerous pandemic around the world. We had no idea what its effects really were. We didn't know how many deaths it would cause or who would be most affected. So there was a lot of unknowns. So it was clear that we had to do something. But what is not really acceptable is the lack of this kind of discussion and the lack of forensic looking at, well, look, the next time something like this happens, what are we going to do? And we're not asking the questions. And it's great that you are here this morning. But I think you talk to anybody and they shiver at the thoughts of another lockdown. I don't think they'll be as compliant.
But if we go back only a month to Storm Éowyn, people were left with it for maybe a week, 2 weeks. Yeah. And I'm sure some people were left completely, quite literally cut off from electricity, but also isolated. Absolutely.
And you had some frightening situations where people relying on medical equipment, medical beds, hospital beds in their own home. It's the sheer sense of isolation and the failure to connect with people and services, etc. And I think we do need to ask these questions, not in a blame way. I don't want to do that. I don't think we should, but in a learning way, because we will be faced with situations like this before, and we're no more ready now than we were then.
And that's it. And I guess, with something like the Storm Éowyn, yes, you can begin to put contingency plans in place. You can plan for the next one. It seems logical. You can get forewarning of that coming. Something like a pandemic. And I think if there was even a hint that there was going to be a lockdown, I think it would have a huge effect on people as well. But I know you were quoted again in media recently as talking about the lack of that isolation as well, and that people, that social contact, but also the need for supports, for stuff to get out there and help people come together. And there are some great examples around our community of groups that during COVID in particular decided to take action and said, look, let's get people back out. And I came across a fantastic story yesterday, and in the Rock GA Club is part of the latest chapter of this story, that last Wednesday night they held the local bingo in their club hall for the first time. It was jam-packed, it was packed out, but there's a lovely story behind this as well, and there's quite a few steps into how it ended up being in the Rock GAA. But I'm delighted to be joined now by Anthony Ging, the chair of the Rock GAA Club over near Mount Mellick. Good morning, Anthony.
Morning, Ronan. How are you?
Fantastic. Anthony, you had a fantastic night on Wednesday evening, I believe. The first time you hosted the local bingo in the hall there. How did it go for you?
It went really well. Better than expected, Ronan. Huge turnout. Just shows there was a demand for it. There was a loyalty to that group. And the friendship that joined from that group, and it all goes back to COVID.
And that was when I called you about this yesterday, because I just happened to pick up there about the bingo. I saw it in one of the local papers, and without even asking, you filled me in then on how it all began. Take us back a couple of years there. This started on the green in Kerwin Park.
Yeah, so Nuala Kelly started this during COVID. It was a way to get the older residents out, and away from that isolation. So on a Sunday, you used to have a bingo there on the park. So Nuala and her sister and her friends, Mary, Michelle and Ken, got this up and running. And it was very, very successful. And I think, Ronnie, remember back during COVID, unusually the weather was very good. And so they were able to have it out on the green. So, yeah, it grew from there. It went from just Kerwin Park residents to local, the town of Mount Mellick and wider afield.
And it moved then, it became so successful then that I suppose once the lockdowns were again reduced in terms of their severity and people could mix again, it moved indoors then and then continued to keep growing from strength to strength.
Yeah, as I say, the numbers got very, very big. The move to the Clock-In pub in Mount Mellick, and it was there for nearly 3 years, and we were getting up to a crowd of 150 people a night. And it was very, very successful. It came more than a routine for locals and for residents to get out and meet. More, I think it was more the social part rather than the jackpot part came important.
Absolutely, because interestingly, when I first started looking towards bingo for an item on this morning's show, I was thinking of online bingo because it was something that emanated during COVID, and I said at least it's given people a connection. But what really jumped out and was wonderful about your story is it actually started with the physical, the human connection, and that has continued too. The Rock stepped in when the Clock-In wasn't able to facilitate the bingo anymore. The GA Club stepped in as well, and you're important. You want to point out too that this actually it's a charity event. It's a not-for-profit.
Yeah, it's not for profit. The money is back out on the night. So the money that's collected on the night from the book sales, etc., are back into the jackpot. So if you take the jackpot the other night, there's a number. Within bingo, you have your different rounds, your two lines, and your full book and things like that. The jackpot the other night was €1,000, which was won by a local person. That person was very successful that night. Was in. He won also €20 and now €100 on the night. So very successful night for Keane.
Brilliant, and they're coming from far beyond just the Mount Mellick region as well, because it's a real testament to the popularity of bingo too. But in the Rock GA Club, though, you're not unaccustomed to sort of doing stuff to really give back to the community as well. And in 2019, you actually first set up Football for All. You called it Rock for All. What was that about, and what was the objective behind that?
So, Rowan, I was juvenile secretary at the time, and been coaching juveniles for a number of years. And a mother came up to me in January of that year and said her young lad was turning 4 and could he join our academy? And she explained to me his backstory. And from my experience of over the years, kids who are on the spectrum don't tend to enjoy football in the mainstream. So I researched it and came across a lady in Katrina in Laois Sports Partnership, and she came on board with us, and then Peter Halley from Laois GA, and we set up a group, Football for All group, from the ages of 4 up to about 15. And it was incredibly successful. They were coming from Port Charlton, Mounttrack, Slee, Castletown. They were coming from way over there, and I didn't expect that. We were probably the first club outside Dublin at the time. There were 2 clubs in Dublin that had set up Football for All at the time, and there was a club in Cork. and we're first club out in the Leinster to do this. Since then, like Ronan, covering your own station as well at the time by Brian, and since then other clubs have come to us to understand how we do it, and they've set up their own in other counties. So it's brilliant that we're able to give back that way.
Absolutely, and you are creating a little community within the community, and even that can be a great outlet for parents or for people bringing those kids to the likes of the Football for All and those various events. So I have to say, hats off, it's huge work, and it's just a great example of what can be done at community level. And again, we just need people just to stand up and take action on as well. Before I let you go, Anthony, you better tell people how they can actually find out more about the bingo that's taking place in the Rock GA Club.
Well, you could look. It's every Wednesday night, starts at 8. Be there early, and 8 to 10. As I said, the money is back out in the jackpot on the night. So either you look on Facebook, you'll get our air code there on our Facebook page, the Rock GA Club, or look at what's happening in Montmelic Facebook page. And we're just off the Montmelic Emer Road, just about 2 kilometres outside Montmelic town.
Brilliant,
so,
fantastic. A date for the diary. Anthony, look, it's a pleasure talking to you as well. Thank you for the work you're doing there, and keep up that great work. And we'll cross paths again soon. Thanks, Anthony.
Brilliant. Thanks, Ronan. Take care.
Will do. Anthony Ging there is the chair of the Rock GA Club. Seamus Boland from Irish Rural Link is still in the studio with me. We're going to take a short break. After that then we'll look at what can be done. Seamus already said we need to be having these conversations on air with the people, with you in our communities as well. We'll continue that conversation in just a couple of moments.
Surprise yourself with the all-new 251 Suzuki range at Hugo Luna Motors. Suzuki's Japanese quality is ready to stand out and make you feel proud every time you drive. Whether it's the zippy Swift or the adventure-ready S-Cross, enjoy 0% finance, handy tech, safety features and great value as standard. All wrapped in the fun and efficiency of a hybrid. The only tough part? Choosing which car to drive. Visit hugolunamotors.ie today, where we're not just different, we're good different. Finance subject to status, terms and conditions apply.
Saturday View, with thanks to Lumcloon Energy, pioneering innovation, powering progress. lumcloonenergy.com.
0818 300 103 if you want to join us by phone here this morning, or 083 3010 103 by text or WhatsApp if you want to send me a message here in studio. My guest is Seamus Boland from Irish Rural Link, and before the break there we were talking to Anthony Ging, the chair of the Rock GA Club in County Laois. They're over near Mount Mellick, and Anthony was just speaking about the fact that they're now hosting a local not-for-profit bingo that started during COVID on the green in Kerwin Park, purely to give people an outlet, for particularly more older people in the community, to get out and actually physically see other people. And Seamus was talking before the break too about just that sheer importance of having that direct human contact, and referenced a number of reports from the UK in particular. And Seamus, those reports showed up an awful lot more, and they actually did shine a spotlight on, I suppose, the importance of people taking action within their communities.
Yeah, I think, Anthony, that's a great example. And as I said, we had volunteers around the country at the time, and really the biggest need that people were having was the conversation and also the reference. And also in those conversations we run a Meals on Wheels network as well, you know, and they were active during the COVID because people needed meals, especially people recovering from illnesses, etc. And often it was the discovery that, you know, the person receiving the meal actually needed other help. Maybe they needed extra care, and extra medical care or whatever. But the biggest problem was loneliness. I mean, there's no getting away from it. Loneliness, isolation. And I suppose I'll probably repeat myself again, Ronan. It's not that we're trying to criticise the way the pandemic was managed, because there was a lot of unknowns by the experts and they were doing their absolute best, and you could say succeeded very well. But I do think we haven't addressed some of these problems, and they do exist, and even since then. What
are the main problems? Okay, there's people dealing with a lot of grief, there's people dealing with that disconnection. Are there areas that maybe a lot of us, myself and people listening, aren't aware maybe that problems have arisen, that it's not getting maybe coverage, it's not getting, you know, it's not being lobbied by any group? Are there areas in particular that maybe we need to sort of maybe just be conscious of?
Yeah, I think there are a few areas. We must remember it affected young people as well, especially children in that generation. And there is evidence by other reports saying that the generation that were most affected at that stage were teenagers of that era and children, and that their working, socialisation is very different, and their experience of that is different, and that seems to be exposing itself right through the process of their education. So that's one area. The second area is still, as I said, we've just said, loneliness, and it's changed certain habits as well. You hear more and more of people not going out in the evening or not wanting to go out. I mean, the bingo is an example, but there are reports that a lot of the socialisation settings took a hit and never fully recovered. But really, loneliness, the impacts caused to people who are grieving, that hasn't been dealt with.
And of course, you highlighted this recently too, like that your ability or the way you can complete everyday tasks, you can do it now from your sofa. You can do your food shopping from the sofa. You can do all your banking. You can make deliveries. You can order stuff online. You can actually live isolated if you so wish. And
like we're all part of the human race, as we say, we need to mix with each other, we need to talk, and we need to be physically in each other's presence on a regular basis. Because if we don't, again, it's not me, I'm not the expert, but the mental health experts are very clear. Socialisation is one of the great curings or the great assistance towards having not suffering from mental downsides because you are with people. That's the biggest cure. So I think that's also an encouragement because of COVID. We can do so much from home, etc. But heavens, we need to get outside. We need to talk to our neighbours. And IRL have twice a year and maybe more times run a programme called Talk to Your Neighbours. And we strongly advise people to get to know your neighbours.
And I guess, like a lot of things with the rise and the growth of technology and so much talk about artificial intelligence now, we need to start looking at how we can use those technological advancements, like, say, the banking or the shopping, to create us more time to maybe socialise, not to get stuff done to then spend 2 hours aimlessly scrolling across social media or watching videos of cats on TikTok as well.
And I think the great thing about Anthony's participation this morning is people like him are all the time trying to find ways and means to bring people out of their homes and to mix and to socialise together. And I think we need to do that. I heard a terrible statistic lately where one county, not too far from here, I think it was Laois, actually had something like 30 Feroiga clubs at one stage. Now I think that's down to something like 10 or 12, and maybe that's not the correct statistic, so apologies. But it's gone, the main point I'm making here is that's gone down, and that goes about other community clubs and stuff like that as well. So I think I would love to see a better campaign to start establishing new clubs. I don't care what it's in, sport, arts, whatever it is, drama, you name it. We need a lot more of that socialisation, and I think the community is going to have to provide it.
Yeah, and yet we see examples around the Midlands that say things like Vex Robotics, which is a robotics competition at school level, and places like Ballycommon Training Centre. They had 2 teams in the national finals on Thursday. So like, stuff is happening. People are trying to find those groups, find those little tribes. But again, it's finding those people who are maybe left behind for whatever reason as well. The programme for government, the new government is in. I know there's a lot of issues there around getting the speaking rights sorted and be able to move things on as well. Was there anything in the programme for government that made you feel positive for the future, or were there anything that was completely lacking from it?
Well, I think, again, the programme of government does highlight the importance of community all over the place, and you see that in programmes like Meals on Wheels and other things that bring people together. So there's lots of things there as well. But again, we're talking about a real drive to support a whole range of organisations, clubs, etc. Because unfortunately, setting up a club or setting up a group or whatever does have governance coverage that people nowadays, more than before, have to be loyal to. And governments, I would argue, will need to provide a lot more assistance in that area. That would something I would really like to see. But again, the greater support for communities to look at ideas. I like what Anthony was talking about. There are lots of things, more things you could do for a whole range of people, young people, older people, especially people living alone, people who, have left the workforce and, are trying to adapt to a new sense of retirement, etc. And young people especially, because I think young people are so under pressure in school, etc., that sometimes they don't get the opportunity to do the dancing classes, etc. That all needs help. It doesn't happen out of the sky. You can't go to a dancing class that's not there. Somebody has to organise it. And I would love to see a lot more emphasis given in terms of support for these groups and these individuals who are volunteering. All of them volunteering.
Absolutely. And you touched on a very important point there, that yes, there's a lot of litigation, a lot of kind of responsibilities and duties behind setting up a club now, but there are also supports out there through the likes of the public participation networks that are there, and even the likes of Offaly Volunteer Centre and the various groups around the counties that are there to try and give you that steer, that hand, or maybe even find a person who can really help you with that governance. So it's to try to take the fear out of somebody saying and doing like Nuala Kelly did in Kerwin Park on the Green back in 2020 and starting a bingo. It's to encourage people actually to explore those ideas.
Yeah, and I think that's the point. The volunteer networks, all of the networks you just mentioned, do a really incredible work. But I have to say, we've said this in budget submissions in Irish Rural Link, along with 17 other organisations. The reality is the support from revenue is still at 2008 levels. That's unfortunately the case. And these networks are always working against the clock, always working against declining budgets. And frankly, where other budgets recovered from the financial crash, the voluntary budget didn't really. It's still stuck at 2008 levels. Now, we're really serious about socialisation, which mental experts say is the greatest way to avoid loneliness and the consequences of that in terms of mental health. Then we really have to support organisations who do the kind of work that Anthony is talking about. You mentioned Nuala Kelly, or all the various volunteer networks. They do need that help.
In your role, the presidency of the European Economic and Social Committee too, that's given you exposure right across the EU as well. Is this a problem that is replicated in other countries, or have other countries just managed it better?
What I will say is that Ireland is not unique in terms of the issues that we've been just talking about. Some countries have very constructively looked at the outcomes of COVID and have constructively put forward proposals to try and deal with that. But also, it's not just dealing with another pandemic, it's dealing with the realities, as we've said, processes to allow people to socialise. And some countries are better, of course, than others. But I know within the EU, there is a major drive to get countries to look at how mental well-being in particular, socialisation happens. All of that is a necessary oil in the engine of our society.
Very well put, as always. Seamus Boland, this is a conversation that I think we will continue on Saturday View over the coming weeks and months anyway. It's such an important one to have, and let's tap into those real stories around the Midlands. Seamus, thank you as always. When Seamus mentions mental health and supports, there are numerous organisations around the Midlands. One, Accessible Counselling, based in Tullamore. If you go to accessiblecounselling.ie, it's there. It offers timely, affordable, professional and accessible counselling and psychotherapy services. It's seen over 2,500 people in just 5 years. Voluntary-led organisation with professional counsellors on the books. If you need help, if you want to reach out, if there's something you need to deal with, particularly if it's from COVID era, why not get in touch with them today as well? You can also help ACT by voting for them. They've been shortlisted for the permanency or the PTSB Community Fund. So if you go on to Accessible Counselling social media, if you go on to the PTSB Community Fund webpage, you can cast a vote for Accessible Counselling. And if ACT is successful, it will bring some game-changing funding into the organisation over the coming year. Very simple thing to do. It takes about 5 or 10 seconds. You can cast your vote. Tell your friends, tell your family, tell your work colleagues to like, share and do the same as well. And also check out their services. They are one fantastic group that is available in the Midlands to really help deal with that, whether it's isolation, whether it's grief, loneliness, anxiety, overwhelm. There are supports there, but as Seamus says, all these organisations need more help, more support, more security and stability going forward. Thanks as always to Seamus for coming in, and to Anthony Ging. What a great story coming from Laois there as well. I'm going to round up today's show though by just paying tribute to another man with strong connections actually to the Midlands and Tullamore in particular, because Donal Lunny received the Lifetime Achievement Award at the Irish Folk Awards earlier this week, and he's quoted as saying it means so much to him. And I mean, what an indelible mark he has already left on not just the Irish folk music scene but the global folk music scene. So what better man, what great recognition to pick up the Lifetime Achievement Award recently. And he of course was playing at the opening of the Esker Arts Centre in Tullamore, all very fitting. Time for me to go. Lorraine McCormack is here next with Feel Good Saturday. I'll talk to you all on Taking Care of Business from Tuesday at 7. Have a good one.
Saturday View, with thanks to Lumcloon Energy, pioneering innovation, powering progress. lumcloonenergy.com. Midlands 103.